What happens if you rescue a stray dog? This will melt your heart. The moon shone pale and solitary in a sky bruised by the remnants of twilight, casting a faint glow over the deserted alleyway. I could sense something watching me, an unspoken pull in the silent darkness that made every hair on my arm stand alert. My breaths came slow and careful, wary of stirring whatever presence lurked just beyond my view. A single street lamp flickered overhead, throwing a fractured halo of light onto the fractured pavement. It was just enough illumination to glimpse movement, a subtle shuffle of limbs, the faintest suggestion of a trembling body. I froze, heart pounding with the inexplicable certainty that I was about to witness something that would forever change me. I stepped forward, every fiber of my being screaming caution, yet every instinct urging me closer. The shape in the darkness retreated, but not fast enough to escape that fleeting stab of illumination. One fearful eye glinted back at me, a reflection as fragile as shattered glass. The trembling figure was so small it barely seemed real, more like a living shadow that had broken off from the night. My throat tightened as I realized it was a dog, ragged-furred and painfully thin. She tried to inch farther back, pressing her quivering body against the grimy wall in a last-ditch attempt to vanish. The sight of her was so heartbreaking that tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. Her fur was matted, caked with filth, and she had a visible wound on her left hind leg. With every shaky breath, she looked ready to collapse. A swirl of unanswered questions flooded my mind. How long had she been here? Who could abandon a creature in such misery? And why had I, of all people, stumbled upon her at this moment? I was immobilized by a rush of compassion so intense it felt like an electric shock through my core. I crouched down, slow and unthreatening, hands spread palms, up in the universal gesture of I mean you no harm. She flinched at my movement, her ribs heaving in a frantic dance of panic. I wondered how many harsh voices, how many careless kicks, and how many empty promises she had endured. The anger that flared in me was as fierce as the pity, but I swallowed it back. Rage wouldn't help her. Only kindness could. I stayed there unmoving, my knees protesting against the cold concrete. Time seemed to stretch as if the alleyway was cut off from everything else, a small pocket of the universe where only the dog and I existed. Under that single flickering street lamp, I coaxed out a few soft words. "Hey there, sweet girl, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." My voice sounded foreign in my own ears, quieter than usual, filled with raw emotion I couldn't hide. Words alone wouldn't be enough to earn her trust. I let my left hand slip into my coat pocket, fingertips searching for anything edible. All I had was a half-eaten protein bar. Carefully, I placed it on the ground, nudging it gently her way. She stared at it, nostrils twitching, but made no move. Her gaze was locked on my face, as though the promise of safety was harder to believe than the lure of food. The tension was suffocating, a taut wire pulled so tight that any abrupt movement, by me or her, could snap it. I waited, arms starting to tremble. Then, with heartbreaking hesitation, she limped closer on that wounded hind leg, sniffing cautiously at the protein bar. I nearly exhaled in relief. Hope, faint but real, glimmered in her dark eyes. She gobbled the bar in 3 desperate bites, gulping like a creature who didn't know when her next meal might come. I could almost feel her hunger, a hollow ache that demanded immediate relief. Though she was in plain sight now, I still didn't reach out to touch her. I didn't want to betray what little trust she'd offered. Instead, I continued to speak softly, praising her bravery for stepping forward. "You're so strong," I murmured. "You've come so far." As the last crumbs disappeared, she lifted her muzzle. Our eyes met. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw gratitude there, or maybe relief. Still, there was fear, years of it etched into every rigid muscle of her starved body. I knew this was the critical moment. Approach too quickly and she would bolt. Wait too long and I might lose the sliver of connection we'd formed. Slowly, carefully, I slid my hand toward her, not to pet her yet, but close enough for her to sniff. Her damp nose quivered over my outstretched fingers. Then she drew back, tremors running through her. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure she could hear it. Finally, I edged a little closer, pressing my hand gently to the ground so she could approach me on her own terms. She took one tiny step forward, paused, then another, until the cold tip of her nose brushed my skin. She sniffed me for what felt like an eternity, and I held my breath the whole time. Then she took another timid bite of imaginary hope from the air, her mouth parted as if searching for more food or more comfort. She pressed her forehead against the side of my hand, trembling but not retreating. It was the smallest sign of trust, yet it hit me like a tidal wave. I felt tears spill down my cheeks as I stroked her matted fur, my heart constricting in a way I had never felt before. This was the moment that changed everything. I didn't yet know her name, her history, or how I would save her, but in that second I silently vowed I would. She was no longer just a stray dog in an alley. She was a life entrusted to my care, a fragile soul who needed love in a way that was both terrifying and profound. In the cramped stillness of that night, I gathered her into my arms with infinite caution, cradling her ragged frame against my chest. She flinched, but didn't fight me, as though she were too exhausted to run anymore. I told myself I'd do whatever it took to give her a chance. She rested her trembling muzzle on my shoulder, and I rose to my feet, ignoring the needle-like pins and needles in my legs from kneeling so long. I never dreamed that decision would steer my life into a whirlwind of emotion, danger, and undying devotion. It seemed like such a simple act, rescuing a stray dog, but it was the single thread that would unravel an entire tapestry of miracles and heartaches I never could have predicted. As I walked away from the alley, her weight against me felt like both a responsibility and a salvation. It was impossible to know in that moment just how many hearts would be changed by the bond we had just forged, or how many battles we would have to fight to keep it alive. When I reached my small apartment, I realized I was trembling. My coat was streaked with dirt and something dark, blood, I suspected from her leg. My mind spun with next steps. A vet visit was paramount, but it was nearly midnight. I settled her on the couch, layers of old towels piled beneath her to keep her warm. She didn't resist, though her eyes were half-lidded with suspicion. I whispered soft comforts, promising her that this strange, cramped space was safer than the cold alley. I rummaged through my cupboards, half in a daze, eventually finding some leftover chicken broth. I heated it carefully, let it cool, then offered it to her in a shallow bowl. She lapped it greedily, her thin tongue darting out with desperate speed. Every swallow seemed to fortify her. I wished I had more to offer, something substantial and healthy, but my fridge was embarrassingly empty. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'd get everything she needed tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I watched her from the armchair, noticing every detail. The ragged fur around her ears, the dried blood matting her hind leg, the shallow rise and fall of her ribs. As the hours crept toward dawn, she drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, at times snapping awake with a whimper, caught in the throes of nightmares. Each time I spoke to her gently, sometimes humming nonsense melodies until she dozed off again. In the first light of morning, pink and tentative through the dusty windows, I made a decision. I called in sick to work, ignoring the guilt that pricked at me for lying. But there was no choice. Her life was more important right now. With trembling hands, I dialed the nearest animal clinic. The receptionist, hearing the urgency in my voice, squeezed me in for an immediate appointment. It felt like the first small victory of what would surely be a long battle. She was terrified when I led her down the narrow apartment stairs, her nails scraping anxiously against the metal steps. I spoke in calming tones, but she remained on edge, as if expecting some unseen punishment. An icy wind sliced through the air outside, and I clutched her closer, worried about her exposed, emaciated frame. The short walk to the clinic was tense, every passing car and distant honk making her twitch in my arms. At the sight of people on the sidewalk, she tucked her head under my chin, trembling so hard I could feel her heart racing against my chest. By the time I pushed open the vet clinic's door, my own nerves were frayed. The smell of antiseptic and the bright fluorescence struck me as a harsh reminder of reality. A kind-eyed technician ushered us into an exam room almost immediately, and a tired-looking veterinarian followed. He was gentle yet firm, his expression softening when he saw just how skeletal and wounded she was. Over the next hour, I learned more than I ever wanted to know. She had severe malnutrition, multiple infections in her skin, and a nasty gash on her leg that might require stitches. Worst of all was the suspicion that she had been physically abused. Her body bore the signs of trauma that went far beyond simple neglect. While the vet cleaned her wound, took x-rays, and administered vaccines, I hovered close, stroking her ears and whispering words of assurance. She whimpered a bit when the needle pricked her, but overall endured the ordeal with stoic resignation, as though pain was nothing new. My heart ached with every small flinch. By the end of the exam, the vet handed me a list of medications, special food for her to gain weight, and a stern set of instructions. I nodded, determined not to fail her. As I paid the bill, an amount that made my stomach drop, I wondered how I could afford this. But the thought of abandoning her again was unthinkable. I'd find a way, I promised myself. We left the clinic with a bag full of supplies and a spark of hope. She was stable, and her future depended on the care I could provide in the coming weeks. Walking back, my arms straining under the weight of dog food and medication, I realized we were still strangers in many ways. I didn't know her name. She didn't know me or the world I lived in. But I felt a rush of warmth in my chest when I noticed she was no longer as terrified by every passing shape. She didn't tuck her head quite so severely this time, though she still clung to my side. At home, I set about making her a comfortable space. I cleared a corner of my living room, piling it with soft blankets and old pillows. She circled them a few times, sniffed tentatively, then finally lay down with a low groan of relief. I sat on the floor next to her, the medication schedule spread out in front of me, trying to memorize every detail. I needed to apply ointment to her wounds twice daily, give her pain medication, and feed her small, frequent meals so her starved body could adjust. She watched me with solemn eyes, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of curiosity within their dark depths. Maybe she realized this was going to be her home for a while, that safety was within reach. With a trembling sort of resolve, I reached out and gently stroked her cheek. She leaned into my hand. That small gesture melted me completely, a fragile acceptance that seemed to say, "I'm trying too." I whispered, "Luna," testing the name softly. I wasn't sure why it came to me. Maybe because she reminded me of the moon I seen that night, solitary and beautiful in her quiet struggle. "How does that sound?" I asked, half smiling. She tilted her head, and though she didn't understand my words, it felt like a new beginning. Luna, a name that meant there was hope even in the darkest places. Over the next few days, every hour was an emotional. Luna's progress was both swift and heart-wrenchingly slow. She showed moments of surprising resilience, wagging her tail in a stilted way when I returned from errands, or letting out a small yip of excitement at mealtime. Yet there were also moments when her trauma surfaced. A door slamming in the hallway would make her cower and whine, pressing her body flat against the floor. A stranger's voice outside the window brought back old terrors, and she'd tremble uncontrollably, eyes wild with remembered fear. I tried to imagine the life she'd had before. Maybe she was born on the streets, never knowing a gentle hand. Or maybe someone had once cared for her, only to abandon her when times got hard. My chest tightened when I thought of all the hardships she might have faced, each one leaving its mark on her body and soul. I would never fully know her story, but I did know how it would end, with her finding love, safety, and a life worth living. A week into her recovery, I woke to a strange new sound in my apartment, a soft, hesitant panting at my bedroom door. I opened it to find Luna standing there, her nose quivering, tail giving a trembling wag. Until that moment, she had mostly stayed in her corner, too timid to explore or even walk around confidently. Now, she seemed to be summoning all her courage, peeking into my room as if to say, "Is it okay if I come closer?" I sank to my knees and opened my arms. She padded forward with careful steps, sniffing the threshold of my room. Then, ever so slowly, she pressed her muzzle against my chest. I held her, overwhelmed by the gentleness of her gesture, tears threatening to spill. This was trust. This was the meaning of second chances, crystallized in a moment so tender that I felt my own heart healing alongside hers. In rescuing her, I realized I was rescuing pieces of myself I never knew were lost, parts that yearned to give and receive unconditional love. Word spread fast among my friends and family that I had taken in a stray. Some thought I was crazy, questioning the wisdom of taking on such a big responsibility. Others were more supportive, offering small donations for her medical bills or dropping off treats. But no one truly understood what Luna and I were forging together, a bond that was changing me from the inside out. I found myself smiling more, worrying less about trivial problems at work. My free time was devoted to her, to watching her blossom under even the smallest kindness. Then, as life so often does, it threw a curveball. About a month after I found her, Luna started limping again. At first I thought maybe I had been too lax in her exercises, or that she had strained her leg. But her eyes told a story of deeper pain. She whimpered if I pressed near her old wound, and a feverish heat radiated from it. Terrified, I rushed her back to the vet. My stomach churned with dread as they took her in for more x-rays and tests. The news was worse than I feared. The infection had traveled deeper into her leg bone, a complication the vet had suspected but hoped would heal with antibiotics. Surgery was now a possibility. If the infection spreads further, amputation might be necessary. The thought of Luna losing her leg filled me with a crushing sense of helplessness. She had already suffered so much. How could fate be so cruel? For days I wrestled with the decision. The surgery was expensive, and even then there was no guarantee, but to do nothing would be unthinkable. I remember sitting on my living room floor, Luna's head resting on my lap as she slept fitfully. I looked around my modest apartment, nothing fancy, but it was all I had, and I realized I was willing to lose every material thing if it meant giving her a real chance. That realization struck me with a powerful clarity. It wasn't about the cost or the sacrifice. It was about doing the right thing for a soul that depended on me. I scheduled the surgery. The vet explained it would be a delicate procedure to remove infected tissue and possibly some bone. There was a risk. She might not make it through if complications arose, but the alternative was guaranteed suffering. The morning of the operation, I clung to her as they prepared her for anesthesia, tears slipping down my cheeks. She gazed at me with eyes that trusted me implicitly. I whispered, "Be strong, Luna," and kissed the top of her head before they led her away. The hours that followed were some of the longest of my life. I paced the waiting room, ignoring the glances from other worried pet owners. My mind spun, latching onto worst-case scenarios before I forced it to cling to hope. Finally, the vet emerged, pulling off a mask and meeting my gaze with a reassuring nod. The surgery had gone as smoothly as could be hoped. They believed they had removed all the infected bone and tissue. Luna was in recovery, alive. I nearly collapsed with relief. My hands shook as I signed more papers, arranged the payment plan, and was given instructions for the lengthy healing process. When I finally saw her, groggy and bandaged, I felt an outpouring of gratitude that made me lightheaded. She was alive. Her leg was intact, though wrapped heavily in gauze and splints. The fight wasn't over, but this was a massive step toward healing. Bringing Luna home was like bringing home a soldier from a battlefield. She was exhausted, scared, and needed constant care. I prepared her medications, set alarms for her feeding schedule, and slept on the couch to be near her. It was emotionally taxing, and more than once, I found myself weeping into my hands, overwhelmed by the pressure of being her lifeline. But every morning, she would look at me with those gentle eyes, and I would find the strength to keep going. Weeks turned into months, and Luna's rehabilitation was a slow climb filled with minor triumphs and heartbreaking setbacks. She had physical therapy sessions where she'd tentatively put weight on her healing leg, guided by gentle exercises the vet recommended. Each time she managed a small success, like standing for a few seconds without collapsing. It felt like witnessing a miracle. In those moments, I understood the boundless capacity of resilience that lived within her, an echo of the resilience I was learning to cultivate in myself. Our bond grew into something deep and unspoken. She'd follow me around the apartment, no longer cowering at every noise. She'd greet me at the door when I came home from work, tail wagging in a circle of joy. She discovered the pleasure of toys, especially a squeaky stuffed rabbit that became her favorite. When I curled up in bed, she'd settle at my feet, occasionally pressing her muzzle against my toes as if to say good night. There were still shadows in her eyes at times, but they were slowly diminishing, replaced by a cautious happiness that shone through her every movement. One crisp autumn day, I decided it was time for her first real outdoor adventure beyond the mandatory vet visits. I found a quiet park on the outskirts of the city, a place with sprawling fields and old trees whose leaves had turned fiery shades of orange and red. When I opened the car door and gently helped Luna out, her nose twitched as she took in the new scents. A breeze ruffled her coat, and she glanced at me with something akin to excitement in her eyes. We started walking slowly, mindful of her leg. She sniffed every leaf pile and tree trunk, tail wagging in a measured rhythm. The sun was warm on our backs, and the sky arched overhead in a brilliant, endless stretch of blue. I laughed when she stopped to investigate a stray butterfly, her ears perked in fascination. It was the first time I heard my own laughter echo so freely in months, and it startled me how good it felt. Then in a moment so pure it nearly brought me to my knees, Luna broke into a gentle trot, testing her leg in a burst of confidence. She ran a few steps, awkward, halting, and then looked back at me, ears pulled back as though waiting for my approval. I clapped my hands, cheering her on, tears of pride stinging my eyes. She wagged her tail even more vigorously, as if to say, "I did it. I can move again." That day was a revelation, one that reminded me how hope can bloom after the harshest winters. Luna and I returned to that park often, each visit a little triumph. She got stronger, more confident. People passing by would sometimes stop to remark on how sweet she was or ask about her story. I kept it short, simply saying she was a rescue I found in an alley. Sometimes I'd see their expressions shift, part pity, part admiration. But to me, she wasn't a sad story. She was a living testament to the power of compassion and perseverance. Life settled into a comforting routine, punctuated by Luna's enthusiastic greetings and quiet evenings, where she'd rest her head on my lap while I read or watched television. Her presence seemed to fill spaces in me I hadn't realized were empty. I found myself more grateful, more open, more attuned to the subtle beauties around me. The hum of city traffic, once just noise, became a reminder of the vibrant pulse of life. The small gestures of neighbors, like smiling or holding a door, took on a new significance. Everything felt interconnected, bound by threads of empathy I was only now learning to see. Yet, in the midst of this new normal, a letter arrived that threatened to unravel it all. It was from my landlord, a terse notice stating the building was to undergo extensive renovations, and all tenants were required to vacate in 60 days. Anxiety hit me like a punch to the gut. My job barely covered my current rent. Moving meant a down payment, deposits, higher monthly costs, especially if I needed a place that accepted pets, which were often restricted or came with hefty fees. Panic took hold. Where would Luna and I go? I spent the next few weeks scouring listings, making calls and visiting potential apartments. Rejection after rejection pounded my hope into dust. Some landlords refused to allow dogs of her size or breed. Others asked for exorbitant pet fees I simply couldn't afford. Meanwhile, the deadline loomed. I had flashbacks of Luna trembling in that alley, and the thought of failing her now was unbearable. Friends offered advice or sympathy, but no real solutions. My savings had been drained by Luna's medical bills. I was on the brink of despair when, late one evening, I stumbled upon a modest little house for rent at the edge of town. The listing showed a small backyard, perfect for a dog to roam, and the rent, while slightly above my comfort zone, was not completely out of reach. My heart fluttered with cautious hope. I immediately contacted the owner, an older woman named Ms. who spoke kindly on the phone. We arranged a viewing for the next afternoon. As Luna and I arrived, Ms. was already waiting on the porch, a welcoming smile lighting her lined face. She knelt down to greet Luna, extending her hand gently. To my shock and relief, Luna wagged her tail and sniffed Ms.'s hand without fear. It was as though she sensed the woman's kindness. The little house was cozy, a living room with well-worn wooden floors, a tiny kitchen with outdated cabinets, and a fenced-in yard filled with overgrown wildflowers. It was far from perfect, but it felt warm, lived in, and safe. I could imagine Luna bounding through the yard on her improved leg, the two of us sharing quiet mornings on the porch steps. Ms. turned to me with a soft gaze. "I'm hesitant to rent to just anyone, especially with a dog, but there's something about you too. You remind me of myself years ago when I rescued a dog who changed my life. His name was Charlie." She paused, lost in a memory. "He was an old beagle with a heart of gold. I believe those who show kindness to animals are the best kind of people. If you want this place, let's work something out." Tears of relief welled in my eyes and I choked out a thank you. It felt like a lifeline had been thrown right when the waters were closing over my head. We worked out the details, and by the time we left, Ms. handed me the keys to a new chapter of our lives. I hugged Luna close, whispering, "We did it, girl, we have a home." Moving day came with its own whirlwind of stress, but also an undercurrent of excitement. With help from a couple of good friends, I managed to pack my sparse belongings into a borrowed truck. Luna rode in the passenger seat, watching the cityscape roll by with wide-eyed curiosity. When we finally pulled up to the little house with the yard, I breathed in the scent of fresh possibilities mingled with overgrown grass. Adjusting to our new home was an adventure. The house's plumbing was finicky, the floors creaked ominously, and the electricity was prone to short flickers. But it was ours. On sunny afternoons, I'd sit on the porch steps while Luna explored the yard. She'd sniff the wildflowers, chase the occasional butterfly, and sometimes just flop down and roll on the grass in pure doggy bliss. Watching her revel in this freedom made every sacrifice worth it. With each day, her leg grew stronger and her spirit soared higher. Yet life, as I'd learned, is rarely content to let happiness remain unchallenged. A cold snap hit earlier than usual that year, bringing harsh winds and a biting chill that crept into our old house through every crack. One especially frigid night, Luna began to pace restlessly, whining in a tone I'd never heard. I checked her water bowl, her food dish, even her bandages, though her leg was long since healed. Everything seemed normal, yet she was upset, panting and pawing at the door. Unease prickled the back of my neck. I decided to trust her instincts, so I grabbed a flashlight, bundled us both in jackets, and let her lead me outside. She trotted into the yard, head low, tracking something. The wind howled, rattling the fence. I shivered. Luna suddenly sprinted toward the far end, barking with an urgency that made my heart pound. I followed the beam of the flashlight, squinting through the darkness, and nearly dropped it when I saw what had captured her attention. There, half hidden behind a bush, was a small shape shaking in the cold. As I crept closer, shining my flashlight, I realized it was another dog, this one no older than a few months, a puppy with wide, terrified eyes. Its fur was soaked from a recent drizzle, and it was shivering violently. My mind flashed back to the night I first met Luna. It was like seeing a ghost of the past, only this pup's expression was even more panic-stricken. The puppy tried to scurry away, but it was so weak it stumbled almost immediately, letting out a frail whimper. Luna approached first, wagging her tail gently, crouching low as though reassuring the pup that it was safe. I was stunned by her compassion, this dog who had once been too frightened to lift her head. She sniffed the puppy, gave a soft, comforting lick, and then turned to me with a look that spoke volumes. "Help, please." My heart clenched. Another life in need. Another soul abandoned to the cold. Every rational part of me screamed that I couldn't afford another dog, that I was already stretching my resources. But one look at that trembling bundle, and I knew there was no other choice. Luna had taught me that sometimes the only right answer is to love bravely, to give more than you think you can. I gathered the puppy into my arms. Its little body felt weightless, all bones and shaking limbs. I could feel each rapid heartbeat against my chest. Without hesitation, I rushed it inside, Luna padding faithfully behind. Once in the warmth, I wrapped the pup in towels, letting it soak in the heat of the radiator. Luna lay beside it, sharing body heat, her eyes filled with a gentle concern I'd never seen in a dog before. By the time morning arrived, I'd managed to feed the pup some diluted broth, just enough to soothe its hunger without overwhelming its stomach. I made another frantic vet appointment, praying I could handle whatever bills awaited. As the vet examined this new little bundle, I braced for more bad news. But thankfully, apart from malnutrition and exposure, the pup appeared to have no serious injuries or illnesses. And so, in the blink of an eye, I found myself the caretaker of two rescued dogs. One just barely recovered from her own trauma, and the other so new to this world of human cruelty. I named the puppy, a name that somehow felt playful and determined, as if summoning the spark of life he needed to survive. Over the coming days, Luna became his protector, guiding him through the house, sharing her toys, and gently correcting his antics when he got too rambunctious. It was remarkable to see how far Luna had come. Where once she'd trembled at every shadow, now she stood firm, confident enough to comfort another frightened soul. I realized rescue was a ripple effect. In saving Luna, I had inadvertently saved. Compassion begets compassion. I had given Luna a chance, and now, through her presence, she was giving the same gift. As gained strength, he turned our home into a whirlwind of puppy energy. He gnawed on shoes, wagged his little tail with enough vigor to topple him over, and yapped at the mailman through the front window. Luna tolerated his exuberance with patient grace, occasionally rolling him over in a mock tussle when he got too rowdy. Their bond was a living tapestry of healing, each thread woven from trust and unwavering love. Then one cold winter morning, a remarkable thing happened. I woke up to find sprawled across Luna's back, both of them asleep near the radiator. They looked so peaceful, two survivors who had found solace in each other. My heart felt too big for my chest. I stepped outside to get the mail and noticed Ms. waving from her porch next door. She smiled knowingly when she saw the second dog. "Looks like you've doubled your blessings," she called out, and I couldn't help but grin back. In that quiet moment, I remembered the night I first found Luna in the alley, the flickering streetlight, the trembling figure, the raw fear in her eyes. I could never have imagined all that would follow. The surgeries, the triumphs, the move, the puppy who would join our little family. Each twist in our story was both terrifying and beautiful. Each high and low formed part of a greater tapestry that proved one simple truth. A single act of kindness can reverberate far beyond what we ever anticipate. As the months rolled into spring, our house bloomed with life. Once brittle fur turned silky, and he bounded around the yard like he owned it. Luna, now strong and confident, watched over him with gentle authority. I often sat on the porch sipping coffee, marveling at how a single rescue had into so much more. People in town began recognizing us, the person with the two rescue dogs. Some even stopped to donate blankets or food, touched by our story. It was as if kindness was breeding kindness. One afternoon, I received a call from the original vet clinic where Luna had her surgery. They were organizing a community adoption fair and wanted to know if I'd share Luna's story to inspire others. I agreed, feeling a flutter in my stomach. Public speaking wasn't my forte, but if Luna's journey could encourage even one person to save a stray, it was worth it. The day of the fair arrived, bustling with people and animals seeking forever homes. I stood on a small makeshift stage, Luna at my side, wagging his tail nearby. As I began to speak, my voice trembled at first, but I soon found my rhythm, letting the genuine emotion pour out. I described the night I found Luna, her slow recovery, and how her courage had led us to save. By the time I finished, tears shimmered in more eyes than just my own. A round of applause rippled through the crowd, and I stepped off the stage, my cheeks flaming with both embarrassment and pride. People approached me, some with tears, some with gratitude. A few said they had been unsure about adopting a stray, but after hearing Luna's story, they wanted to open their homes. Volunteers busily guided families to meet the dogs in need of adoption, and a wave of hope swept through the fair. Luna and, oblivious to the magnitude of their influence, sniffed at the grass and accepted pets from excited children. That evening, as we drove back home, I felt an overwhelming sense of completeness. In saving Luna, I had inadvertently found purpose. In giving her a home, I discovered a deeper capacity for love. And in helping, I realized that love wasn't a limited resource. It expanded to fill every opportunity we gave it. The sun was setting in a blaze of gold and pink by the time we arrived. I parked the car, and before I could open the door, Luna placed her paw on my knee. Our eyes met, and in that silent exchange, I felt she was telling me something profound, that she understood how far we'd come and that she was grateful. Let out a playful yip, scrambling to stand on the center console. We were home, in more ways than one. I carried a sleeping inside, Luna trotting ahead to push open the living room door with her nose. After setting him gently on his favorite cushion, I sank into the old armchair, the same chair I'd slept in the night I first brought Luna home, watching over her battered body. Now she hopped onto the couch, circled once, and settled down with a satisfied sigh, looking at me as if to say, "We've come a long way, haven't we?" My heart brimmed with gratitude so immense it felt almost too heavy to bear. I thought about how easily I could have walked past that alley that night, too busy, too afraid, or simply too indifferent. I thought about how many times in life we choose not to see the suffering around us, convincing ourselves it's not our responsibility. But all it takes is one moment, one decision to reach out with kindness, to set in motion a chain reaction that touches countless lives. In the stillness of that evening, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, my phone buzzed. A message from the vet clinic. "Thanks for sharing your story. We got several adoptions today, families inspired by Luna," and my chest tightened with happy tears, the message blurring for a moment as my eyes welled up. This was the outcome of hope triumphing over despair, of refusing to give up when circumstances seemed impossible. Luna rested her muzzle on her paws, gazing at me with calm contentment, snored softly, dreaming doggy dreams of endless play. And there I was, in our humble home, struck by the miraculous truth that sometimes rescuing a stray dog is not just about saving them, it's about saving ourselves. It's about unlocking a wellspring of compassion that can ripple outward, touching hearts we never imagined. If anyone had told me how drastically my life would change that night I walked down the alley, I would have scoffed. But looking back now, I see that Luna's rescue was the beginning of a transformative journey, a testament to what can happen when you open your heart to another being. You find courage in the face of adversity. You discover the healing power of unconditional love. You realize that miracles are often born from acts of gentle, persistent kindness. As the sky outside darkened, I rose from the armchair, crossing the small distance to join Luna on the couch. She wagged her tail, stretching so I could settle beside her. I stroked her fur in slow, soothing motions, remembering the terrified, trembling creature she'd once been. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, each exhale a soft reminder of life and hope. And so our story continues day by day, woven from moments of trust, empathy, and resilience. No matter what challenges the future holds, financial worries, health scares, or the unpredictability of life, I know I'll face them hand in paw with Luna, and together we've already conquered the darkest nights. Together, we've found light. That's what happens when you rescue a stray dog. Your heart stretches to contain more love than you ever thought possible, and in return, you gain a companion who teaches you the meaning of loyalty and gratitude. It changes you, irrevocably and beautifully. And if you let that love flow outward, it just might change the world for more than one lonely soul in the night. So if you ever find yourself standing in the silent darkness of an alley or a busy intersection, or outside a shelter cage, and you lock eyes with a trembling creature who needs a hand, who needs hope, take that leap. Don't be afraid, because saving them might just be the spark that ignites a chain of miracles, illuminating your own life in ways you never imagined. I switched off the last lamp in the living room, guided by the gentle glow from the porch light filtering through the window. Luna shifted against me, contented and safe. Gave a tiny sleepy sigh from his cushion. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and somewhere in that hush, I sensed the weight of countless stories unfolding, of people and dogs, of rescues and second chances, of compassion quietly outshining neglect. In the soft gloom, I pressed my forehead against Luna's and closed my eyes. The steady beat of her heart thumped against my palm. My final thought before sleep claimed me was a silent vow, a promise to honor this bond, to protect it, nurture it, and share it with anyone who would listen. Because what happens when you rescue a stray dog really can melt your heart, and that warmth is powerful enough to set the world on fire with love.